And welcome to the Offensive Interference Webcast. I'm Coach Gene Clemens. Thank you once again for joining us. Happy! It's Women's Appreciation Month or Women's Month, however you want to call it. I'm paying homage to the women all month long. Make sure that you tell any woman that's in your life how much you appreciate them, whether that be your mother, your sister, your cousin, your girlfriend, your wife. That the woman that you see walking down the street, be careful, obviously, but make sure that you pay them homage, because they are, the better half in many ways. And so especially this month, let's make sure that we hold them up and show them the respect they're due. But spring is in the air, and we know spring is in the air, and I really want to get into this first down today, because I think that one of the most interesting matchups, especially in the spring season for college football, and we know that's the FCS, is this weekend. North Dakota is going to travel to North Dakota State. And if you've been following me or you've been following anything about the spring season, you know that North Dakota is having a fantastic year, and North Dakota State isn't necessarily having an awful year, but they lost. And that's news enough when North Dakota State loses. But I think it may be a little more than that. And so now we get an in-state rival that's hot, that has an opportunity to really be hot. And my guest today had wrote an article about this rivalry all of a sudden being blazing again, and that's Mike McFeely. And he's joining us right now from Mike, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Gene. Thanks for having me on your show. I appreciate it.
Hey, I appreciate you joining me, and on short notice. I really do appreciate it. So
no
I'm curious. How long have you personally been covering football in North Dakota?
I've covered North Dakota State since 1997. So I began to cover them when they were in the waning days of their Division II time, and a little bit after their Division II dynasty. And in the late 90s, UND, North Dakota, which is about 70 miles north of Fargo and up in Grand Forks, UND by that time had caught NDSU, and I think even in some ways ended up passing NDSU. And so I've covered games between NDSU and UND between 1997 and 2003 when the annual series stopped. And then I've also covered the non-conference games in 2015 and 2019 when UND had moved up to FCS. So I know a little bit about NDSU football the last 25 years or so.
Absolutely. By a little bit, he means he knows every single thing about NDSU football. Oh my goodness.
A little. Just
enough, huh? Just enough. I got you. So this weekend, because I really want to jump into it. This weekend, we're getting North Dakota coming in to North Dakota State hot. Are there going to be fans allowed in, or they?
The Fargo Dome seats about 19,000 for football, and local rules and local health officials worked with NDSU. And the capacity is going to be 9,500, so 50%. So
a legitimate crowd.
These two home games so far this year have drawn about 7,000 for the first game and about 6,500 for the second game. So they haven't reached the capacity. I'm expecting this Saturday there's going to be 9,500 people there because it's NDSU UND.
Absolutely, and so that will be interesting to see how the crowd plays. In there, especially when you put people in a dome, that definitely can bring the intensity up a lot more. We have this is a legitimate game. Right now, I believe North Dakota State is favored. They're a slight favorite in this game. But
they shouldn't.
I don't think so. Exactly. So let's get in that. Is this UND team, are they for real?
It sure looks like it. Yeah, I mean, UND's history in FCS has not been stellar. They're playoff eligible. This is their 9th season, and UND has not won a playoff game yet. And NDSU, everybody knows what they've done since going Division I. They've won 8 of the last 9 championships. They've beat a bunch of FBS teams. They have Carson Wentz going in the first round. They have Trey Lance, who's going to go in the first round here in April. So NDSU has really had a much better run in Division I. But UND, in part, I'll say it because of the pandemic and because of some things that happened to NDSU's roster, this UND team right now is better than NDSU. UND has all of its players back. Didn't lose anybody from that was supposed to be on the roster in 2020. So it's loaded with seniors. Its offensive linemen have put on a bunch of weight. Its defensive players have taken about 1 million college snaps, and they're good. And so UND just has the advantage in a lot of different ways. NDSU, if there had been a fall 2020 season, the NDSU team would have been epic. It would have had Trey Lance at quarterback. Dylan Radens at left tackle, who's also going to be probably a second-round pick in the NFL draft. Christian Watson at wide receiver, a kid from Tampa, an area you know well. I know, Gene. He's just an outstanding wide receiver. They were going to be loaded in fall 2020, but they lost a bunch of guys. NDSU lost a bunch of guys who decided to go to the NFL, decided to transfer, decided to just move on with life. They've had some injuries. And so this NDSU team is really probably the most flawed team that I've seen probably since 2009 or 2010. Doesn't mean they're terrible. Doesn't mean that they're still a pretty good FCS team, but they're just not at the level that they once were. And the opportunity there now is for UND to slide into Fargo and win on Saturday.
Absolutely, and I agree. I've been watching North Dakota, and I look at the level of the teams that North Dakota has beat this season compared to the resume that North Dakota State has put together. And even if we go back into the fall, and I know it was kind of like a throwaway showcase game for Trey Lance essentially for North Dakota State, but there wasn't really much of a showcase in that game. I mean, no. that game was haphazard to say the least. So even back then, they didn't look like the world-beating North Dakota State. But we've always trusted.
Now wait a second. They put up 39 points and over 400 yards of offense against the Central Arkansas team that was a top 10 team. So that game did not turn out the way people wanted it to turn out, which was to show Trey Lance, was going to be a first-round draft pick. But it was still okay in that game. They weren't all.
No. And again, I'm not saying that they looked horrible, but they were not as. I think it's fair to say they were not as efficient as you would normally see them be when it comes to how they like to play offense, and how they like to comport themselves on defense. Totally. And so, when we come into the spring season, and they struggle because I think that Zeb Noland is not what they've had. I think that he's not to the level of what they've become accustomed to at quarterback.
No, not at all. I think that surprised the Bison coaching staff. I think that when Zeb Noland signed with NDSU, transferring over from Iowa State, I thought they believed that Zeb was going to be able to be kind of a bridge quarterback. After first of all, NDSU was very surprised that Trey Lance was only here for 1 year. Let's make that clear. I don't think they saw Trey Lance. Don't think they saw his trajectory going up quite as quickly as it did, and so they were caught off balance. But I think they did feel comfortable believing Zeb Noland, who's a fifth-year senior who played at Iowa State and played okay at Iowa State. I think they thought he was going to be okay, if not to the level of a Trey Lance or a Carson Wentz or even an Easton Stick. But his, frankly, poor play has just not been what NDSU has needed. And there's a question up in the air in Fargo right now whether true freshman Cam Miller is going to start on Saturday against UND or whether it's going to be Zeb Noland. So that's really one of the major questions for NDSU is I don't have a quarterback right now.
Well, I was actually going to be, my next segue. Do you have a sense of which way they're looking to go on? Because we know that Miller brings that added dynamic with the feet that Noland doesn't possess. Is there a chance that we see them just go ahead and say, what the future is right now? Because the one thing we know about about North Dakota State is they've never been a slave to their quote unquote system. They've always been willing to transform into the system that's best for their personnel. Is this a situation where we could see them go to the freshmen and have it almost make that tweak that they need to once again make another run?
I think that they're going to start Zeb Noland at quarterback on Saturday and see how it goes. And if it goes well, they'll stick with it. If it doesn't, I don't think they'll hesitate to go to the true freshman. I don't know really if NDSU and its coaching staff is looking at this spring season as the be-all, end-all. I think that if they don't make the playoffs, if they don't win a national championship, I think the coaching staff knows that there's more on the horizon for this program, that they're not going to be held, to this idea that they have to win everything this spring. That being said, I think they'll go with Cam Miller if the situation warrants it, and they can look ahead to next fall, knowing that they have a transfer quarterback from Virginia Tech named Quincy Patterson III, who is about 6'4" and 250, I believe is his what he is. And I know that the coaches like him a lot. And they also have another freshman coming in as a recruit next fall from Omaha, a kid named Cole Payton, who they really like to be their quarterback long-term. And so they have some options down the road. And so I don't know if they're specific. They want to win, of course. They're always trying to win. I don't know if they are going to be devastated if they lose tomorrow or lose Saturday and maybe don't make the playoffs this spring.
I understand. I think, though, as a coach, anytime you lace them up, you're trying to look for a way to get it done. So
absolutely,
especially this weekend.
Yeah, and let me say this, Gene. Let me say this, Gene, is that when NDSU went down to Southern Illinois and just got destroyed in the second week of the season, I think that surprised the Bison and the coaches, and I think they maybe picked up the intensity a little bit with what they're trying to do this spring. I thought they went into Carbondale and did not expect to get blown out of the water the way they did. When they did, I think it was a wake-up call for a lot of the players and coaches saying, you know what? And the players said it. They said, we can't just roll our helmets on the field and win games just because we're NDSU. We have to play and play hard. And I think so that's a dynamic here too.
So just because you've been around, what's the impact in the state when both of these teams, if both of these teams can not only just be good in this game, if both of these teams are going to be to a level where they're going to be looked at as perennial top 10 teams, what could something like that do for the state? I mean, we understand when South Dakota and South Dakota State are good, that kind of elevates the entire state. What do you think the ramifications of that will be for North Dakota if this is not just a blip on the radar, if North Dakota is actually here to stay?
And I think UND is here to stay. I mean, they've struggled compared to NDSU in FCS, but they haven't been a terrible program. UND the last 3 or 4 years has been kind of a bubble playoff team. They've made the playoffs a couple times. So they'll be okay. They're going to be a top 25 team and maybe a top 15, top 10 team here going forward. But what it's going to do for the state is it's going to return an old rivalry that was really at one time was the biggest game in the state every year. North Dakota is not a highly populated state. The two biggest sporting entities are probably NDSU football and UND hockey. Has a tremendous hockey program at UND. But it's a football state more than a hockey state, right? And so when you have these two major institutions within the state, both good, both playing each other every year, both getting media attention, both hopefully sending guys to the NFL, both recruiting the state, well within the high school ranks, that just makes everything better, right? It makes everything more fun.
Both continuing to rob Minnesota for all their talent too. I think that's hilarious, but that's a whole other story. They continue to steal from all this talent out of Minnesota. I'm just looking at Minnesota like, what are you guys doing over there?
Yep, and Bubba Schweigert, the head coach at UND, Gene, said in his press conference this week, he said, you know what? This game is good for the sport of football in North Dakota because it all the high school kids are paying attention, all the parents are paying attention, and for one day, the whole state is focused on one thing. And there's really not a lot else in North Dakota where that can happen. And so, there's a rivalry back and forth. And back in the old days, back in the 90s, it got frankly nasty sometimes with all the stuff going on. I don't know that it's going to reach that level again, but with UND improved now and NDSU still pretty good, I think it's going to be a lot of fun going forward. Here's a question for you too, though, is NDSU going to go to the Mountain West Conference someday? That's something that is sort of on the radar with me, because with Boise State possibly leaving the Mountain West, does that open a slot for NDSU? And would the Mountain West take NDSU? So how long is this rivalry going to be played? Probably for long, but you never know.
I think the interesting thing is that they have never left. I mean, they still have never left. They spent an inordinate amount of time just dominating FCS. You would have thought that they would have made a play to get somewhere. Especially back when the when the Pac-12 was realigning and they added more teams. I thought that was a time that you may have seen North Dakota State jump into one of those conferences that voted for the Pac-12, but they didn't. And so I think that I thought from being away that maybe somebody sat back and went, you know what? Sometimes it's just better to be a dominant dynasty than to just keep on going up and end up like a Marshall or end up like a Georgia Southern, where you're at another level, but you're never really a nationally relevant, program. So we'll see. I think they should do it. I would love to see that social experiment that everybody always talks about. The North Dakota State fans who beat their chest, and rightfully so. When you have a dynasty, you should feel confident about your team. Saying that they can compete with anybody, and then the other people on the outside that says, yes, you can compete with everybody for a game, but can you do it on a game in, game out, week to week basis?
Right.
I'd love to see that experiment happen. We shall see. So the game this weekend, I think, and you can tell me what you believe, but I think this is going to come down to quarterback play. And I just believe in Tommy Schuster a lot more than I believe in Zeb Nolan, and quite frankly, anybody that North Dakota State puts in. Do you see that kind of coming down to who wins and who doesn't win, who has a better quarterback play?
Yeah, that's certainly a big part of it. I think it goes a little bit deeper than that, though. And I will say that Tommy Schuster has played far better than Zeb Nolan, or the little bit that we've seen Cam Miller play. There's no question that he's the hotter, better quarterback coming to this game. But I think it's even more simple than that. NDCU's offensive line is just but they're just not very good. NDCU's offensive line is just not what it has been. And part of the reason is because they lost Dylan Radens at left tackle. Their center, Carson Schoening, decided to go and get married and move on with his life instead of come back and play football in the spring. And so NDSU really is short up front, and they're playing true freshmen at times for stretches on the offensive line. And so they just haven't been able to consistently run the ball the way that NDSU can.
Normally does, yeah.
Struggles at quarterback with Zeb Nolan. They haven't been able to pass the ball. And so I'm no football coach like you, Gene, but if you can't block, if you can't run, and you can't pass, I'm not sure that's good offense. Maybe you can fill me in. I don't know. I'm
with you. I am with you. I think that the trenches are massive. I just think that North Dakota State does such a good job of scheming things up that they mask a lot when it comes to their deficiencies in the trenches.
Let me throw one more name at you. Let me throw something at you. Have you watched UND play this year?
Yeah, I've seen three of their games. Yeah.
Okay, what do you think of the running back Otis Weah? Because he's my other key. He's good.
He's really good, yeah. But their offensive line is massive too. I mean, he's running behind a bunch of walls, and so I'm curious to see, because they played against some really good talent. That's why I've been so bullish on North Dakota, is because they played against good teams, and they've handled them pretty easily. I thought this week was an opportunity actually against Western Illinois for a trap game where they could get caught sleeping because they're coming off of a big win and they were going into North Dakota State, and they just wholeheartedly went over there, beat them up, got ready for North Dakota State. So I'm with you. I like the talent that North Dakota has in that quarterback running back battery. I think they have a bunch of solid receivers. I don't think they have any stars out there, but it's going to be an interesting game. We'll see, because I don't think anyone comes up with a game plan better than North Dakota State does. They have a way of finding a game plan that's going to work for what they do. And it'll be interesting if that game plan that they put in place is going to allow them to have success against North Dakota this weekend.
Yeah, and you're right, but I also think that UND's offensive coordinator, Danny Freund, has done a great job this year, kind of putting together game plans for what fits the talent he has at UND. The offensive line at UND is as you pointed out, is big and much improved. NDSU and UND played in 2019, and UND did not move the ball in the second half at all. I think they had 2 first downs in the second half back in 2019. NDSU just dominated up front in that game. It's not going to be the same. NDSU's defensive line is really good and really deep. It might be the best defensive line UND sees all year, but UND's offensive line is good, and they're older and they're bigger than they were a couple of years ago. And with Otis being able to break tackles and do the bowling ball thing he does, he's able to make up for whatever deficiencies the offensive line has, and he's going to be a handful for NDSU. I really like Otis Weah. I live in Moorhead, across the river from Fargo, and Otis is a Moorhead kid, so I like Otis Weah. He's a fun kid to watch.
So you followed him. You've seen him kind of come up.
Yep.
Absolutely. It's going to be a really exciting game. I think it's a win for the state. Overall, regardless of who wins, if North Dakota State wins, then that's the sign. Okay, they've righted the ship. They may make another run. If North Dakota wins, it's, hey, can they take this and launch into a playoff run? I think it's a win for the state, and I'm really looking forward to watching that game this weekend.
So am I. I think that actually UND right now, even though they're ranked number 2 in the country, I think that the Fighting Hawks deserve to be number 1. I think they're better than Madison. I think James Madison this year is a lot like NDSU. They've lost a bunch of players to transfer. They don't really have a quarterback they like, frankly, so much in Harrisonburg. Yeah. I think they're number 1 on their reputation right now. And I think that UND is really the best team in the country right now, the way they're playing, who they've played, how they've beaten them. And if they can knock off North Dakota State, which I predict they're going to do, my score is 27-14. I think UND is going to win comfortably. UND is poised to get through the Missouri Valley Conference season with maybe 1 loss at the most, and then really make a deep playoff run because they're going to get some home games in the playoffs. So maybe a little shift for this spring here in FCS football in North Dakota.
And that's definitely something I believe that would be a welcome thing. Like, sometimes it's good to see, have the king have to reset and get back in the gym and make sure that he's still, on top. But I'm with you. I think North Dakota not only wins it, I actually don't think it's going to be close. I think they're
okay.
I have an article coming out tomorrow, but I think that anybody who knows me knows that when I pick a short dog, it's usually because I like them outright. And I think that North Dakota is going to use this game to announce themselves, and what better way to do so. And the scary part is that I think the North Dakota State coaches know that UND wants to use this game to announce themselves. Yep. And so that's why I'm so intrigued to see what's going to happen. It's going to be a really enjoyable game.
It will be. And I think you're right with UND. UND, from what I hear from talking to people who are maybe around the program more than I am, UND is very confident. They think that this is their time, I think, to finally, get the attention away from NDSU. and kind of take the spotlight. And I think that they have the experience and the veteran leadership to maybe do that. If I can just for 1 minute, let me throw this at you. So what if though, and I'm working on an article right now, right before I came on with you, what if NDSU does win? So you have this upstart that's really improved and everybody's loving them. And they're probably the #1 team in FCS right now. And everybody's saying, finally, somebody's ready to knock off NDSU and make a run at them. But what if NDSU wins? What does that say for FCS? Does that mean that NDSU is just going to rule the subdivision forever? Because this is not a great NDSU team. I mean, I've seen them all, and this is not one of the top epic NDSU teams. They have some flaws. So if they can beat what we think is the best team in the country, then what does that say for the subdivision?
Well, I think it could say, well, it's going to say NDSU being NDSU, but it also could point to, was North Dakota just not ready for the spotlight? And that, I think, is something that's interesting, because if North Dakota State beats North Dakota, that there's a chance that may be North Dakota's only loss going in. And if so, they'll see each other again at some point in those playoffs. And that then becomes interesting, because now the narrative becomes, okay, well, can North Dakota do it when the lights are the brightest? And that's something we don't know, because we've never seen them have to do it.
Right.
So I think even there, as a writer, I just look at the storylines and I'm like, okay, this stuff writes itself. Like, I don't have to come up with anything. I don't have to manufacture anything. These stories write themselves. And so either way, I think people are feeling good. Quickly, I think the Big Sky, if North Dakota State is able to beat North Dakota, I think the Big Sky or the leaders in the Big Sky have to feel good about their opportunities, because nobody knows North Dakota better than they do. And so, like, you know, seeing them go from being a middle of the road Big Sky team to all of a sudden elevating to the #2, who we believe is #1 team in the nation, they're probably going, well, is the Valley really that, you know, or have they been just kind of overrated because there's been one dominant team at the top? And so I think they have to feel a lot better about that. We'll see. I also think people should keep an eye out. Jacksonville State is probably, in my opinion, like a sleeper team. I think if you look at what they were able to do in the fall versus what they've done so far in the spring, they're going to be a tough out in the playoffs.
I have not seen the Gamecocks play. I've not seen them play this spring. Watched last fall, but they're traditionally a pretty strong program in FCS. They had a couple of down years here in the Ohio Valley. I think they kind of got passed by Central Arkansas. Not Central Arkansas, was in the Southland, but that they kind of, they've had a couple of down years after getting to the title game back in 2015 when they played NDSU. But there's a lot of talent in that part of the world. There's a lot of.
I think there's a lot of sharks in the water that will be watching this game and saying, depending upon the outcome, they're going to be like, oh my gosh, North Dakota, what are we going to do with them? Or they're going to be like, oh wow, this is gettable this year. Because you're right, James Madison has looked very ordinary. They have not played anybody, and that's why they haven't lost, because they haven't played any teams that are that good. And they probably won't, because of the teams who opted out in their conference, and they're playing double up games down there. They're probably not going to get that challenge until they get to the playoffs. But I think that they're in a situation where they could be out in the first round, depending upon who they draw. So it'll be interesting to see.
James Madison has COVID issues right now, so I don't, they're not going to play for this week, and I'm not sure they're going to be able to play next week either. So it looks like maybe, much like the Valley, maybe Delaware is the hot team this year in the CAA, because they brought back their whole team. The Blue Hens did, and maybe the Rocket Squad is going to get that chance to surpass JMU here this spring and get that auto bid. And maybe Delaware then is going to be the best team in the CAA this spring. And it's all going to go back then to next fall to see if the Delawares and the UNDs can maintain this level they're at, or whether it's going to be NDSU and James Madison reloading for the fall and kind of getting back to where they want to be and probably should be.
I tell you, catch North Dakota State this spring, because it's going to be hard to beat them in the fall. James Madison, I don't know if they've got a quarterback on the horizon that's going to be a guy who can keep them moving in the right direction. Jackson State is scary. Jackson, I know that I don't know what their plans are about how they want to, whether they're going to go into the Celebration Bowl or whether they're going to, I don't know what their plans are. But as a team that essentially operates like an FCS program, Jackson State is going to be scary good next year, because they're right now they are who they are, and they are missing mountains of talent that are either not eligible to play yet or are coming from high school in that they've been able to recruit. That's going to be a great team to watch as well. So I appreciate it. Mike McFeely, you can follow him on Twitter at McFeely_info forum. He's the host of the Mike McFeely Mess podcast. When does that normally drop?
I usually drop a couple, 2-3 a week. Kind of depends on my schedule. So just check out inform.com. Inform.com is the website. Lots of coverage there this week for NDSU UND. We got 3 writers covering the game, and a TV station that we own here in Fargo is all over the game as well. So lots of UND NDSU coverage at inform.com.
Absolutely. And if you want to follow someone who's plugged in on what's going on, with North Dakota State, you probably already know. I don't really need to tell you who he is. You probably already following him. Mike, I really do appreciate you joining me, man. It's been a great conversation. Let's definitely do it again sometime.
You bet, Coach Gene. Thank you for having me on. Appreciate it.
Not a problem. Thank you.